What we've been watching is Fulton County, Georgia, where a hearing is underway to decide whether or not Judge McAfee is going to ultimately replace District Attorney Fani Willis in the election interference case. This testimony today, all the discussion in court has been around the admission of phone records potentially, but it all stems on the former divorce attorney of Nathan Wade. And he's the one who's been on the stand and has been peppered by questions, 6 or 7 by my count, defendant counsels. So I'm joined right now to break all of this down. It's been a long 2 hours, lots of detail. We're going to go through it with host of the Katie Phang Show right here on MSNBC, Katie Phang, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, and former district attorney for DeKalb County, Georgia, of course, and criminal defense attorney Robert James. All right, a big welcome to you. Lisa, you and I have had the advantage of discussing this last hour. Talk about Terrence Bradley and what the point of the questioning to him was and how much he has revealed.
Well, I think we know now, Alex, that Terrence Bradley exchanged texts with Ashley Merchant, she's Mike Roman's attorney, where he offered up a bunch of information about the relationship between Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. Today, he is trying to walk that back and say that he didn't have any personal knowledge, including when the relationship started, he never saw them together, that any knowledge he had about the relationship came from a single conversation with Nathan Wade. But the defense is trying to establish you knew that this woman represented a defendant in the Fulton County RICO case. You knew why she was asking you these questions. She even gave you a draft of her motion to disqualify. And if there had been something patently false in there, you're a lawyer. You would have told her as much, wouldn't you? And he at one point said, well, I can't say I would or I wouldn't have. But they have established that he fully understood what they were doing with the information that he provided, and that he has an obligation to tell the truth today. And the bottom line, Alex, is there really is no in-between. He was either lying and or speculating when he confessed to Ashley Merchant by text, or he is covering up for D.A. Willis and Nathan Wade now.
Which means what for him, Katie? I mean, how effective has he been as a witness? His behavior would suggest what to you?
Well, that's important because the judge in an evidentiary hearing, Alex, is not only the person who understands the law, but he has to apply the facts to that law. And the judge is also the credibility person in this case, right? He's deciding whether the credibility of these witnesses passes muster. I would say the thing about Terrence Bradley is towards the end of the last round of questioning, he did admit that he would have lied and he would have passed along lies about a friend, even as a lawyer. I think that old adage, Alex, the devil makes work of idle hands, might be the case here because he passed along gossip. I think he says, he did say, I was speculating when I made these statements. The real question, Alex, is this, right? The gut check is this. Is Terrence Bradley willing to risk his bar license to take the stand and lie for Nathan Wade and Fani Willis? Because I would say no, he's not going to lie for them. Is there a very small carve-out that Judge McAfee found in terms of the testimony that Bradley was having to answer? Yes, and the only lawyer, and I have to give him credit, was Steve Sadow for Donald Trump. Steve Sadow is the only one who said, let's make sure we understand the scope of what you are allowed to testify about right now. And according to Terrence Bradley, it was only one conversation that happened in the back of Bradley's office about the relationship between Wade and Willis. But what is the evidence, Alex? There is no evidence right now as to a date that Bradley has offered up as to when Wade and Willis began their romantic relationship, right? So what has McAfee heard so far? He heard from Wade and Willis that it began in March of 2022 after Wade was appointed. And the only countervailing evidence would be from Robin Yurdy, the former friend and employee at the DA's office of Fulton County, that relationship began in October. But Terrence Bradley has not confirmed Robin Yurdy's testimony that the relationship began back in 2019.